Hello, insane children, and welcome to episode 21 of Alice Asylum Crowd Design. We are coming to you from our Discord server. Discord is a feature that we open up for our insane children over on Patreon. If you'd like to join one of these crowd design sessions, which we tend to do every other week, you could go down to the links in the description below and follow those to find out how to become a patron. Today, we're going to be talking about three topics, at least. First topic will be that we're working on a set of enamel pins inspired by the art and characters from the Alice games, and so we're seeking input and feedback from our insane children on the design and direction of those pins. We are also working through boss designs for Alice Asylum and have recently seen a design put forth by one of our artists, Alex Crowley. And so we're going to kind of open up discussion about bosses in general and how people might get involved with helping to guide the direction on those. And then we're going to get into a much larger conversation around the Hatter's domain and what it represents. We do know that this is a stage related to bargaining, as described inside of the Kubler-Ross PTSD sort of grief cycle. But we also need to kind of talk about what bargaining means to the overall arc of Alice's narrative. And I kind of have a feeling that there might be something quite deep and important to the overall narrative hiding within this domain. So we're going to dig into that just a little bit. As usual, if you are on Discord and you have a functional microphone and a functional brain and you'd like to add something to the conversation, then you can use the microphone emoji, and that will indicate to our mods that you are wanting to contribute something. So with that, I think I will hand it over to our mods who can say hello and add anything else of importance.
Hello, one and all. Thanks for joining us. Potential spoilers ahead. And if you're watching this on YouTube, don't be commenting in the comments as if it's live. There you go.
You're running the fun, Martin.
They will always do
Sorry.
that. Discord check, mic check, brain. Well, 2 of 3 isn't bad, I guess.
All right. So let's start off. We have, as I said, over on Patreon, we've been posting up some designs for enamel pins. And actually, as of this morning, there was a new one that came in called Tea Time that Jennifer did. And that is a representation of the Mad Hatter's hat with a little omega symbol. And it kind of looks like there's some eyeballs poking out from inside the hat. I said to her, and this kind of goes along with the feedback I gave her previously, that I feel like our enamel pins ought to be more in line with something that you'd see like the bad guy, world destroying organization in a James Bond film wearing. I kind of thought about the Spectre sort of octopus pin. I thought that was quite cool. So I was thinking that all of our pins should have that kind of dark feeling to them. So I wrote back and said to her, maybe do the classic Hatter's hat, which is the second thing I posted in here. And Magus, could you hit mute so we don't hear your keyboard, please? So that was put up this morning. We've also got, she shared one that is a top-down view. Am I pasting into the wrong place?
I think so.
Oh, am I in the wrong place?
Yeah,
Oh, sorry.
I've tried to paste them in the right place.
Sorry about
Me
that.
just pasted the top down.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, here's the hat, the Hatter's hat image. Sorry about that. Yeah, so I guess let's hear what the insane children have to say about the pins and the direction on these. And also, I think we're kind of opening it up if anybody has suggestions for pin designs.
That first one that was posted, that Patreon, that Magus did, the one of Hysteria Alice, it looks like her dress, I know it's supposed to be sprawled out from a top-down view, but it looks like she's coming out of a flower.
Yeah,
Which
I
is
think
also cool.
Jennifer did mention that. She said it was kind of hard to tell. Is she sort of grasping hold of her dress or is she coming out of a flower? I don't know. It's an interesting design. I wasn't able to immediately kind of say no, this doesn't work. Whereas with the Hatter pin that she did, it kind of had it looks like something out of that Goofy Racers cartoon. I forget what that's called.
Wacky Racers.
Wacky Racers.
Yeah, and that just doesn't do it for me. I was not a fan of that show as a kid. So of all these, I really like. She's got the one that's the queen with the tentacles and the eyeball. I mean, that looks like a Spectre pin. And of course,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
love tentacles. I like the teapot one. Again, it's got kind of like an evil underground society kind of look to it.
That one on the cat shark, I like everything overall. The teeth, though, I think if she were to add the lines, separating the actual teeth, they would just make it pop out a little more to me.
Right. All I know is that the original version she did, I felt like it looked
It
like
looked
there
goofy.
was balls hanging down between his eyes.
Yeah, I see it there.
And then
It
I
can't
sent
be
that to her.
unseen.
Can't be unseen. So if anybody has any other thoughts on other characters you really like or other bits of Latin that you'd like hidden into one of these pins, I think this is the time to share it. We have Wendy saying, yeah, not a fan of the tea time. Angel Wing says, what's tea time in Latin anyway? I don't know. There are Latin translators online. They're not always super accurate, but they probably know
Tius
better
Timus.
than I would. Yeah.
Alice on Elm Street says the Kesh mouth feels a bit too elastic to me. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm trying to point out too. It looks funny without the actual lines in the teeth.
Yeah, the biggest question is how busy, to avoid the busyness of pins, though.
No,
So-
you can be as busy as you want. It's just you can't have too much color in it, then it looks kind of funny.
Right.
Yeah, some of the
Greg.
pins. Oh, go ahead.
Said Greg has a good question about how big the pins are. His general brings up a good point.
We talked to the factory. They should be in the realm of about 2.5, 3 centimeters ish.
I guess you'd say standard size. I mean, they're not super big and they're not super small. They're sort of like a thing you would hang on the lapel of your shirt without it dragging the lapel down, right? I mean,
So your standard Disney size pin, basically.
Yeah.
something like that, yeah.
But the examples the factory showed us, they're capable of doing some reasonable amount of detail at that size. So I think that's something probably not to be too concerned about.
And you did share some of those samples with Jen, is that right?
Yeah, I sent them along to her.
Yeah, so I think Jen is working with an understanding about how much detail can be put in there. But that's actually something in the direction that I sent to her as well is, try not to make them too busy. That's one of the reasons why in one of the previous updates on Patreon, I mentioned that, first and foremost, try to design them so they'll work as purely simple, like silver and black. And then maybe every once in a while add a little bit of color in there. So that's what she's working on right now.
Oh. I think seeing one of her actual, style things would be really cute too. I know those are all things, but just have one little cutesy one in there would be nice.
Yeah, I think I'm uploading right now the Get Bent one.
Yeah, something like that. That kind of cute, yeah.
I actually think that would make a good pin, and it's something that only we kind of understand, but at the same time, I think you could wear it and people would be like, oh, okay, it's funny.
Yeah.
So if I had to choose a cutesy one, I would suggest we go with Get Bent.
As long as we can call the bottle Governor, so we know it's Get Bit Governor.
Yeah. It's a bottle of Governor.
It's a bottle of Governor.
There you go. So yeah, I think if we do this, what we're looking at right now is a set. What did we say, Martin? A set of 4 standard and then a 5th that's a special for Patreon. Is that right? Hello.
Sorry, I was muted. Yep, that's right.
Okay. And then I know somebody else had mentioned like what is the backing? Like what's the pin
Yeah,
like?
that was me. Like, is it gonna have a rubber thing to put on the pin or metal or? Because I know the rubber ones last a little longer, but they can also not be. And so yeah.
I'm just fishing out the examples that the factory people sent, so we can have a little look at the kind of detail and backing. Give me a sec.
This factory is funny too because they have been unsolicited emailing us for about a year saying, hey, over here, we can do enamel pins. Here, enamel pins, enamel pins. And so I think they're maybe surprised and happy that we finally came back and said, okay, we can do something.
Yeah, those look like rubber backings. That's good.
Yeah, those are rubber. You can always switch them out too. Like you can buy pin backings.
Yeah.
Like out here with the Disney and the mouse, people buy like locking backings actually.
Yeah, I like the lock ones. They feel more secure, so they're not gonna just pop up or
Well, I mean, we probably want to tell them if we want rubber or when you say locking, do you mean the metal ones that have the little squeeze bit on them?
No, they're actual like you have to use a hex key to lock them down.
Yeah.
Like
Whoa.
It's
they're
like super
those,
legit.
Yeah, you
That's
wouldn't put these in a
hardcore.
standard pin set, but yeah, that's for people who really want to make sure people don't walk away with them.
Huh. Interesting. Okay. Is that something we should look into or?
Maybe for like just the
Yeah.
Patreon exclusive ones, so like that's the big deal.
We're special.
Yeah.
I could look at it.
Okay. Well, Martin, let's ask the factory if they have locking backs, if they know what that is and if they can produce
All
that.
right. Yep.
Okay. This broccoli one is very cute. He's got no chats, no hearts, and no friends.
The sad broccoli.
It is. This is off topic, but I have this idea that I'm gonna trick my kid into thinking broccoli is only for adults and that he's not allowed to eat it.
Good.
And I just want to see like how long before he's throwing a tantrum demanding that he be able to eat broccoli, and then see like what the result is once he realizes that it's broccoli, you know.
Like,
Or
this
if it'll
isn't
work.
what I thought it was.
I don't know. But I mean if we go weeks of pretending that no, broccoli is only for adults, no, you can't have any broccoli, stop crying about it, and then finally, okay, you can have broccoli. I want to know what the result, the reaction will be. Anyway, we'll record that and share it
Yes.
online.
I was gonna say
Patreon's
you don't have child services out where you're at, so
That's not child services type of stuff, is it? Tricking children?
Well, I mean, there's the whole Santa Easter Bunny thing too, so I don't know.
Yeah.
what the
All right.
Santa bunny isn't real?
If you want it to be.
So back on topic, it looks like these pins, each one has its own cardboard backing. So I guess one of the questions, Martin, or also for Insane Children, is we're going to do a set of 4. Should they come individually on their own backing, or are we going to do 4 of them on one back, and then a 5th one that's free on its own back?
I believe we're going to have them on one back, but we could change that, I'm fairly sure.
So what would be the preference from the Insane Children? If you received a pack that had, in total, there's 5 pins, do you want 5 backs as well? I don't mean the locking back, I mean the cardboard presentation card.
I'd like it.
Or
just
is it
in...
okay?
I'll keep going.
I would say for the standard have one back for the 4, and then the Patreon have its own back.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Okay, that's what I would be leaning towards as well. I just want to make sure everybody's on board with that.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Well, I think we learned some interesting stuff here today about the pin backs, the locking backs. So we'll look into that. Also, everyone can kind of see the level of detail they're able to achieve. It looks to be pretty good, you know. I mean, in terms of the blacks, if you look at that broccoli, he's actually got pretty fine details in his eyes.
Yeah, it's looking at Bender's mouth. That would be perfect for Chesh. Just how detailed that can go.
Yeah, it's pretty good. So let's keep all that in mind. We'll get some more designs done up, and then we'll start to make final selection on what the 4 and the 5, the 5th pin will be. Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, hopefully it won't be too long before we have a little compilation of all Jen's art, and we'll be popping that up on Patreon and doing a poll, try and get people's opinions on that. So hopefully very soon.
So Octo Chicken Greg says, I'm not probably not the target pin audience, but I'd be most interested in super clean, elegant designs, the Chaos Emblem, the Omega, one of the keys from AMR. So I'm with you on that, Greg. I prefer these to be super clean, and like what I wrote on the Patreon post, I was actually pretty specific. What did I write over there? I'll just read this out. I said, let's make this set of pins to be like the Spectre ring from the Bond films. Dark, sinister, belonging to a secret group of mysterious, insane children. When viewed by people from outside the group, I put in parentheses, cult, it raises questions about the relationship to magic, the occult, and S&M sex dungeons. Keep them simple, black, silver, and with a touch of or a single color when if needed. So that was my sense, is that, yeah, I mean, this would be something that, you'd wear on your lapel, and it would get you into a James Bond secret society or I don't know, sex dungeon, if that's where you wanted to go.
Why not both?
Maybe both.
Yeah.
Maybe both.
Both is
James
good.
Bond sex dungeon.
Now that's the place I want to go to.
And none would be surprised.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with him too. Maybe a second pack eventually with something as clean as those, because I do like to have like a Zelda Triforce on my lapel, or just something clean and simple like that, a Star Tetrahedron, and that catches more eyes than like something with a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah, I agree. So I'd like us to push this to be simple, clean, and maybe a second patch gets done later, a second set gets done later.
Yeah.
That has a bit more. Although I did, of all of the kind of cutesy pins that we've seen, I thought that this cat with the knife in its mouth was cute.
I want that too.
I think it's just the eyes. It's like dirt. All right, let's not go down that road. So that's pins, and we'll do some more updates, and yeah, we can vote on it, but that's the general direction that's going.
Sweet.
All right. Are we good? We're going to move on now. We're going to talk about bosses. So Alex recently shared a boss design, and he wasn't really sure where this went. He kind of left it open, and I shared it, and I suggested that this could be the boss that pops up at the end of Alice's movement through the stage of judgment inside of anger. So that would be that she goes into the courthouse and she gets sentenced, and then she's sentenced to the croquet game. And then this thing could pop up at the end and be like, hey, you're not allowed to win this game. I'm judging you. Let's fight, or something like that. So this would not be, the final boss at the end of the game, like he suggested, because it doesn't really align with the overall theme of the game, but it certainly aligns with the theme of judgment and anger in the Queen's domain. So what I wanted to do was say that of all the things that we could be currently working on as a team, certainly the idea of boss designs is one of the kind of more obvious and easy. My meaning is that we've got these areas laid out: slumber, shock, denial, anger, bargaining. The boss designs will be extensions of the kind of emotion and the stuff that's going on in those stages. And I think everyone involved with our crowd design effort kind of knows the general concepts that go into designing bosses, the mechanics and sort of the ways that you have to employ strategy to defeat them. So I was going to say this could be something where the insane children kind of sketch out ideas for bosses to appear at various stages. And then you could give that stuff over to Alex, and he could actually do the rendition of those things. So something to think about.
I was gonna say, building onto that, I like that idea. Like, have the crowd like literally give them a question, like, you know, depression. Draw out, what kind of a boss you think that would be like, and then just have
Yep.
Alex merge all that and whatever.
That's exactly correct. I think that's it's an interesting task. It's a kind of straightforward. I think we all understand it. And so, yeah, think about bosses. Look at the stages that we currently have, the stages of grief. And also keep in mind that inside of each of the stages, there can be a mini boss as well. So, one of the big complaints about Madness Returns was that there weren't enough bosses. And so I was thinking that as a kind of joking, not joking response to that with Asylum, it could just be like a frickin' boss fest. And then we'll have people complaining, there's too many bosses, so that way nobody's ever happy.
People happy about video games? Never.
Now you got to give them something to complain about.
Yep.
I just like the idea of, like, for the different levels, just as you said, like, have people write down, like, just starting from, okay, slumber, what kind of boss, how do they act? Are they fast? Are they slow? Are they big? Are they small? Just that concept helps build out, like, what do you see as a boss?
It's like, what does this mean to you when you hear it?
Yeah.
That's right. Okay, so Alice on Elm Street says that cat looks ready to cut a bitch. Yes. B-Master says the final boss type, creepy but awesome. Angel Wings says sentenced to crushing by croquet mallet. Yeah, we kind of, there was this idea that little Alice maybe didn't understand the word croquet, and so she thought it meant like croak, in other words, to die. So the court sentences her to croquet, which of course is taken to mean that she's sentenced to death, but then she gets back there and it's kind of like a croquet field and you're supposed to play through it, but everyone who does dies. So she's the only one who manages to get through it alive. And then the idea would be that this boss that we see that Alex did pops up at the end and says, hey, you're not allowed to win at this game, fight me. And so then a boss battle ensues. Luca says, one boss that me, Seafoam, Octo Chicken, and Asteria Visual came up with was the Card Guard Sergeant and Ancient Child is one too.
That wasn't really written as a boss. That was just like a culmination of ideas for like a funny scene. Luca wrote that it'd be funny if there was like Card Guard, like Sergeant, and telling the troops what to do. Octo Chicken added, they should make this joke like, all right, all on your faces. And the other cards would look at him like, oh, what does he mean by that?
All right.
Like, all actually on our faces or on our bodies, whatever. And I added that, it'd be funny if they just had disgruntled grunts and it just be subtitled for that, so they're just like, and it just went off that. It's funny.
Cool. Well, if you guys write that kind of stuff up, it is the type of thing that if we want to get it turned into a storyboard, not everything we write up can be turned into a storyboard, but some of the stuff, especially for boss designs, we could give to Alex, and he can incorporate those ideas into the kind of sketch that you see here for the Judgment boss.
Mm-hmm. I think B Master wants to talk.
All right.
Well, at least they're trying to get our attention. Do you want to hop on mic or?
So Ancient Child says Boss Fest. Yes, we will definitely have a Boss Fest. Lucas says, I think sub-bosses are a good idea. Yep, there's plenty of places for sub-bosses. Dormouse could be a slumber boss, says Angel Wings. Yeah, Dormouse was constantly in trouble for being sleepy. Now, whether or not, so I think, unfortunately, for this concept, though, it's a good idea, but the problem is slumber, we don't actually really play it, and we certainly wouldn't have a boss there because slumber is representative of the time before Alice's confrontation with chaos, and so we wouldn't fight anything there. It's the slumber means you're asleep, you're not fighting. But if you moved that concept, the Dormouse idea, move that to maybe depression, because that would fit. That someone who is constantly falling asleep, is without a goal, without a purpose. Dormouse might fit into that. So that might be a place to take Dormouse and introduce. Is Dormouse a boy or girl? I don't know.
It always
Anyway,
shifted, I thought.
I don't think
introduce
the gender.
Dormouse as a boss or a mini boss there could be a good idea.
B-Master would like to talk, so yes.
Great. Let's hear it from B Master.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi.
Hello, B Master.
Hello.
We can hear you.
McGee. Master. McGee. Hello.
Yeah, B Master, we can hear you. If you keep that up, we're probably going to mute you. So, do you have a question or a comment you want to throw in?
Don't understand it. Okay. Hold on.
Oh.
I can. Disconnect.
All right, guys. Since B Master is having technical issues, I think we can mute him for now and bring him back later on.
Okay.
Okay. So that's the boss conversation. I don't know that there's a lot more, unless anybody's got any other questions with a functional microphone about bosses. So the basic idea here is look at the different sections, the levels of the game over on the wiki. And again, if you're following along on YouTube, the link to the wiki is in the description below. And under the story levels, you'll see there's shock, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, testing, and acceptance. Every one of those stages that I just mentioned could have a boss and or a mini boss. So take a stab at it. Have a read of what's on those pages. And if the page doesn't provide the kind of information you feel is helpful to coming up with a boss, then bring the questions back to this crowd design session, because those kind of questions can actually force me and force us to fill in details that we haven't yet thought about or felt like we needed to come up with. All right. Okay, so it looks like B Master's having connection problems. B Master, why don't you sort that stuff out? And next time we do a crowd design session, if you've got it up and running, we can give it a shot. You can always try to test your connection and your audio stuff with our insane children here on Discord prior to the prior fire. Okay. So why don't we now transition for the latter half of today's session to the question of the Hatter's domain. So again, if you go back over to the Asylum Wiki and you click on bargaining, that is the section that is controlled and kind of owned and lived in by the Hatter. And bargaining is one of the stages of grief that Alice will go to. It's the stage she goes to after anger. And I actually wrote up quite a bit about this on Patreon yesterday, I think. So what you'd want to go and do is look up the post called "We're All Mad Here" crowd design time. And at the top of that is actually a pretty cool image, a new image that Joey did. That is the Mercury mines, and it shows Alice kind of upside down, sideways, and all over the place inside of the mines where presumably the Hatter mines all of his mercury. So, Hatter and bargaining. As I said at the beginning of the stream, I kind of think that there might be something contained within the Hatter's domain that could be really central to kind of Alice's journey and the resolution of her journey in this game. And this also got touched on a bit in the last crowd design session, I think, where I talked about how Hatter, being sort of the resident scientist within Wonderland and having this laboratory full of all the elements and all the alchemical symbols, and is sort of he's sort of an alchemist, had been poking and probing at the nature of the reality that is Wonderland. And in the process of doing so, he kind of blew himself up, or he blew up his domain, or he might think that he sort of blew up Wonderland to some degree. So I think that in that, and I mentioned before, is him sort of banging his head against the wall at the fact that things don't all add up when he sits down and puts his scientist hat on. I mentioned before, maybe he can do some multiplications up to a certain point. He can get the result for 2 times 2 and 4 times 4, but when he gets to 8 times 8, for some reason it just won't solve. And this is starting to kind of poke at the boundaries of his realization that their existence is contained within the mind. Well, he doesn't know this, but it's contained within something where the rules don't all work the way he would think that they would. And so but the reality of it is that he and everyone else is contained within the mind of this little girl, and she doesn't know the result for 8 times 8, therefore he can't know it. And so this kind of gets us into this conversation about what defines the reality in which we live, and if the problems that she's facing could be recategorized as sort of self-made. In other words, the key to the mental prison in which she's locked as is often the case with heroes in these kind of movies, it's a key that she's had in her hand all along, right? She's always been wearing the magic slippers. Neo has always had the power to, defeat whatever it is he's fighting in the Matrix. So that would be kind of the direction that this might take us in.
So definitely no sort of, what did you call it at the end of the movie? She goes on this great big journey, the movie that you hate. And then at the end, it's not you that defeats the Jabberwock, it's this knife that you just got.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a kind of cheap way out. I mean, one of the descriptions for that is the Deus Ex Machina. In other words,
that's it.
Right. So that came out of the fact that writers of ye olde days, oftentimes, they didn't feel the need to wrap up the story that they were telling on stage with anything that had any relationship to the story itself. Instead, a boulder would roll down the mountain and crush the bad guy at the last moment, and that would be it. That saved the day. The boulder saved the day, and the heroes, everyone lived happily ever after. But of course, people started to realize that was not as satisfying as having the heroes resolve their own problems and learn something in the process, right? So with that terrible Burton film, they pulled an absolutely awful, Deus Ex Machina, which was that, hey, Alice, you don't have to do anything to win the battle against the giant Jabberwock that we've been building up for the whole movie. Simply let the knife do the work. And of course, the knife did the work, and that was it. So, not
and then
good.
They all futter-whacked, and it was brilliant.
And then I threw up. I threw up in the movie theater.
I'm sorry, we weren't supposed to talk about that movie.
We're not supposed to. Martin brought it up.
Sorry.
So yeah, Octo Chicken writes here that a Deus Ex Machina is a plot device whereby a seemingly unsolvable problem in a story is suddenly and abruptly resolved by an unexpected and seemingly unlikely occurrence, typically so much as to seem contrived. Yeah.
I think the best way to go about that, though, is have I can never say it, the Tchaikovsky's gun. So even at the start, you at least have that idea in place.
Yeah.
So
yeah, well, that's oftentimes, what writers do these days is they present you with the solution to the problem almost at the beginning of the story, but at that point in the story, it's seen as so improbable as to be impossible. So, for instance, and of course that then makes the journey that much more interesting. If you start the movie with a guy who's a quadriplegic at the base of a mountain, you kind of assume that, well, by the end of this movie, he better be on top of that effing mountain, or I'm going to be really disappointed with this movie. So then the movie becomes about, like, well, how the hell does he get himself to the top of the mountain, right? So the more improbable the thing is, Matrix was a good one. There's Neo living in this sort of super boring reality. I mean, what could be more fantastic in terms of him climbing a mountain than the realization that everything was an illusion and that he is the one, right? So that movie actually is fairly relevant, though, to this concept of the Hatter discovering the fact that the nature of their reality is an illusion, and then at some point Alice having to realize the same, because it is in realizing that she's inside of an illusion that she can set herself free and kind of move forward to join up with adult Alice. So how we tell that story, though, is really the meat of like today's conversation, and a conversation that we're going to have to continue to have over the coming weeks, because for sure we're not going to solve this in a satisfying way today. But it is something that I want us to think about. Now, we could think about this for the next 3 or 4 weeks or longer, and then ultimately decide that it does not satisfy, like that the resolution of the story based on this concept sucks, and we discard it, and we're going to change directions, and we're going to find some other better way to tell the story. But for right now, I'd love it if everyone, who's interested in the story for the game, start to think about what it means to be trapped in a prison of your own making in your own mind, right? To be constantly pulled back to the past by something that triggers you, because that's sort of a really big function of PTSD, is that when you hear a word, you smell a smell, you see a sign, it could be anything, but these things trigger you back to the inciting incident. And in Alice's case, it's a trigger back to the death of her family and the loss of her entire reality. And so she's trapped, stuck, being constantly pulled back into the past, which means that she cannot move forward. And of course, in bargaining, the idea is you give up the movement forward in exchange for the comfort of an illusion, or the comfort of maintaining some past existence or some past reality that you really should let go. But of course, we humans are very terrible at letting go, because we like comfort, we like things to be the same, even when those same things are not healthy or productive for us. So anyway, figuring out how to wrap all that up inside of a narrative that is satisfying and engaging and interesting is our goal. So something to think about. And let's see if anybody's got any comments on this.
B Master said that he finally has, or she, or they, or it finally has their mic ready. So if we wanted to do that,
Yeah.
All right. For the record, I feel like B Master, you better be ready with that mute button.
Yeah, that, and I was also going to say Discord kicked me off for a sec, so I'll get in touch with Megas just to get the rest of the audio that I need, that I was out for a second.
Okay.
But I got everything working back on my end.
Nice.
all right.
Testing. Hello. Hey, excuse me. Introducing from B Master Animation. Well, even though there's a first Tim Burton film, there's also a second, which is directed by James Bourne from Dora and the Lost Sea of Gold. It's produced by Tim Burton, but explores Mad Hatter's family, though, and it has Sacha Baron Cohen as Time. What do you think about the second film of Alice Through the Looking Glass, aka Alice in Wonderland 2?
I told you had to be ready with the mute button. So yeah, we don't normally discuss the films in any serious fashion, and I've not actually seen the second film, because as a rule, I try not to read or watch or otherwise consume other versions of the Alice stories, because I don't want to have that polluting my mind in terms of what we can and cannot do with the story.
Well, that's good. So, Heather's is domain, but 8 times 8 is 64. Would Alice solve that and make the Mad Hatter go crazy about that answer?
Well, we don't know yet. It could be that he does present her with a series of problems that he's been unable to solve, and yet he believes that they are solvable. So you could imagine a scenario in which he says to her, I know these things can be made true. I know that we can discover what is 8 times 8, and he may send her off with this list of these tasks to go and be solved. So, that could be kind of the nature of part of what he does. Now, obviously, he may ask her to solve more relevant problems than 8 times 8. It could be that he has problems related to emotions or other issues that she's dealing with that he thinks would be good to solve.
So, right. Let's see. Okay, last question. And even though there's the company you own, Spicy Horse, was shut down for some reason because of financial problems. You ever thought of a sequel of Grimm or any other projects you want to revive?
So Spicy Horse was kind of closed and sold, and yeah, it was mainly just because we couldn't change direction with it any further. The properties that were contained within Spicy Horse all got transferred to the new company called Mysterious. So we're certainly legally in a position where we could do a new version of Grimm, but like with anything that we'd like to do, the main problem isn't the idea or lack of ideas. The main problem is finding someone who wants to fund the production of a new game. And the reality is that if you had $10 or $20 million to spend on something in terms of an investment, there's much better things to spend your money on than on making games.
Thank you for your time for asking my 3 questions. I will answer.
No worries.
I'll answer more of them later on. See ya.
All right, bye-bye. Okay, so back to our comments. I see a couple of our insane children. Angel Wings says he blew up Wonderland and now he's trying to fix it. That's in reference to the Mad Hatter. I don't know the answer to that yet. It could be that he blew it up. Be that was representative of the fire that killed Alice's family. So, it's one of those questions that we actually want to ask and that we want to answer. What did the fire look like from the perspective of the inhabitants of Wonderland, and how did they link up the fire to the destruction of the world in which they live, right? So that's something to think about. I'd say that the basic answer here is that the fire not only destroyed Alice's real world, but obviously it also had a major impact on Wonderland and the shape and nature of Wonderland. And so, in a way, you want to have the characters in Wonderland reacting to something that was a sort of natural disaster or unnatural disaster in their world, and then they're able to talk about that, when they talk to Alice. Angel Wings says, didn't the fire happen when Alice was 9? The timeline has been laid out previously. I think that the fire was, we'd have to go look up this, I'd have to go find the spreadsheet, but we do have this timeline, and we do know the date. I just don't have it off the top of my head. But everything we're talking about right now is based off of the fire happens, she goes to the hospital, she ends up in the asylum, and then Asylum is called that because it takes place when Alice is in the asylum. All right, just scrolling through your comments again. See if we've got anything else. People talking about Chekhov's gun. Yeah, that's just the idea that if you show a gun in a movie at any point, typically the rule was if you showed the gun in the first act, you'd want to see someone use the gun by the end of the movie. And that kind of carries over. It can happen on a scene-by-scene basis as well. If some object is highlighted in the scene of a film, that by the end of the scene or by the end of that act or at some point in the film, it ought to be brought back and used or resolved. Angel Wings again saying, since Alice only realized the destruction of Wonderland is the destruction of me in AMR. Not sure how to interpret that. This question might be asked if you've not been following along with our development of the story on Asylum. So I think if you understand that Asylum, there's sort of two distinct characters with perspective on this world, and then there's us, the player, who are watching them. The first distinct character is young Alice, and so she is not aware of the actions that took place in AMR, but the second character is the older Alice, who's actually come back from AMR and is essentially trying to rescue the inner child. And so she would have the knowledge of that line, and we as the player may or may not, but the character that we're playing as, that we're seeing this world through, certainly doesn't. So I'm not sure what that question, how that might fit in with that. Other comments? Okay, it sounds like there's issues with Discord connecting and disconnecting people, so.
Yeah, that's correct. I don't know.
Yeah, I just disappeared for a couple of minutes not long ago. Didn't know what was going on.
Sorry about that. So that kind of brings me to the end of my blabbering about the Hatter and about what his exploration of the nature of their reality means for the story. I'm kind of curious if anybody's got reactions to this as a starting place for the story. Is there anything, in terms of questions that anybody's got, or?
Well, you bring up the Matrix a bit, but there's also a good movie called The 13th Floor that deals something like that, where a character's in a game world, and it figures out how far is this world in the game world. So.
Yep.
And that's...
Yeah, and that also kind of goes to, like, there's a broader hypothesis, the simulation theory or simulation hypothesis, is that perhaps all of us are currently living within an artificial simulation. That's a more modern day kind of thought that, once a society becomes complex enough that they start to simulate their own reality, and they may do that for fun, but then we may be highly complex simulations or avatars living within those entertainment spheres, going about our lives unaware of the fact that somewhere, we're the NPCs, but somewhere there's actual players. So who knows, but there's that. And then, of course, you go back to a kind of more new agey thing that when I was a kid I heard quite often, and that is you create your own reality. So that's also been termed, there was a book called The Secret. It was all about manifesting. I think it was called Manifesting, that's what they called it. But in essence, the idea was, the law of attraction, that you think a thing and you focus on a thing and you attract that thing to you. And, some people kind of feel like, oh, that's hokey, it's silly magic stuff. At the same time, if you look at a lot of modern day psychological theory, you'll also find that people do have some degree of control over the direction of their emotions and their reaction to the world around them, and they just need training in order to affect that type of change in their lives. And so, this also kind of links up with this idea that an encounter with disaster. So you take like an alcoholic who has drank for a very long time, and then they finally have that one experience that's an encounter with chaos that pushes them to make a big change. That's kind of in line with the concept of creating your own reality. Like, you're in slumber, you're letting yourself drift, and you're not really taking control of your life. And then you have the encounter with chaos, and that inspires you to wake up. You're no longer in slumber. You wake up and you take control, and you start to guide your life, right? So this is, it's a story as old as stories, and so that we're exploring it isn't unusual, because anytime you sit down to write a story, you're essentially rewriting the same concept. So we've got time travel and an adventure from Angel Wings. Yeah, I don't know if we would call this time travel. It's inner travel or something. I mean, I think this is an important question because it's certainly going to come up. Like once we have the story written out, and if we try to explain this to people, people are going to be like, "Wait a second, are you saying that Alice, adult Alice, is traveling back in time?" And I think the answer to that is no. She's not traveling back in time, but she is traveling back in herself. She's essentially, and I mentioned this before, she could be sort of reflecting on her past or trying to connect with her inner child. And what we've said is that her inner child is stuck in a loop, and that loop is anchored to the past, right? So it's not time travel per se, but it's certainly her reaching back to, herself as a child and trying to understand why her child doesn't want to come forward with her as an adult and be whole. So that's something, some way to think about it.
It's more memory travel. So it's her looking at her memories, which technically is time travel in that sense of looking back at things. So
Yeah.
that's kind of a good point to put.
B Master makes a pun which is funny but also kind of captures it. That is that Alice is fractured, but also she is whole. Of course, that's the South Park game with fractured butthole. I mean, it's true. And we are like this. We as people can be fractured internally, and then what we're trying to seek here is that Alice, what she's trying to seek is that she's trying to go back and make herself complete again. And yes, one way you could say that, but we're not going to because South Park guys did it already, is fractured butthole. Angel Wing says names hold power. Lucas says the story is about reality not being our own. It almost goes back to the Stone Age. Octochicken says, I like the idea of the Hatter trying to understand the nature of his existence and his world, and that bumping into the underpinnings that he can only be as smart as the mind of the world he lives in. I wonder, though, given his madness, would he be upset that 8 times 8 doesn't make sense? Or would he revel in nonsense and decide that it is his truth? So this is an excellent question, and I think one of the things that we could ask, Alice could ask this, we can ask this, perhaps he doesn't enjoy being mad, and perhaps part of his being mad comes from the fact that things don't add up. So you can imagine, like, he's that guy who is telling everybody that, aliens are watching us and they're doing, now I've got South Park on my mind, but anyway, they're doing anal probes on our cows, and it's like, he's got all the conspiracy theories and he's wearing the tinfoil hat, and after a while that person just starts to sound like they're mad, like they've lost it, right? So his being aware of the fact that the reality doesn't make sense eventually sort of drives him to madness. And it could be that these experiments are some function of his attempt to heal himself, to cure his madness, because he feels like, I'm not very productive this way, I'm not who I want to be, and I want to fix this problem. And so that's the madness actually drives him to the experiments, right? So I think it's a good question, something to think about there. Angel Wings says, so it would be set near the end of her stay at Rutledge. Nope. Angel Wings, I think Magus put in the timeline there. There's a link there to the timeline that we've put together over on the wiki. And it actually has her age 0 to age 25, and it shows you the years and the times in which all this stuff happens. So probably a good idea to have a look at that. For those of you listening on YouTube, again, the link to the wiki is in the description below, and that, if you want to find it, is a page simply called Timeline. So you could give that a look. Angel Wing says, what's the point of madness if things don't add up anyway? I don't know. So Alice says, I don't know why, but this is making me think of that guy from Bacano, who thinks that the world will cease to exist when he dies. Well, in that statement, there is something that we can explore, and that is this observer theory of the universe, which is that without us as the observers, then the universe does die. It ceases to exist. So, there may be a little bit of us looking at that. Could be that Hatter has a twist on that. He's sort of come to the realization that there is a great thinker or a great being whose mind all of their existence resides inside of, and that they must dig in to find who that is and where they are. And perhaps he's discovered that there's something sick or broken with the system, and he feels that he's got to go discover who the mind is that they live inside of, and convince it to heal itself or to cure itself. Now, keeping in mind that we're all sitting here talking about this, the player, when they're playing through this narrative, are not going to be aware of all this stuff. You have to imagine they're going to come to Hatter. Hatter is going to be mad. He's going to be jabbering on about, can't sum up 8 times 8. He's going to tell Alice that there's a problem they've got to fix. He's going to send her off on missions to collect and do stuff. But it may not be clear at that point that what he's doing is trying to send her off to heal who we ultimately discover is her, right? So this is something we will build towards. Megas says it's turtles all the way down. Yes. That is another way of imagining the construction of the universe. And Octo Chicken says, is this a variant of if a tree falls in the woods and nobody hears it, does it make a sound? The universe is happening and nobody observes it. Does it exist? Yeah, well, if the tree falls on a bear who's shitting in the woods, does it go splat? We don't know, but this game may solve that. So I think this is actually a really big and really interesting question, which means that the ending of the story could be quite big and interesting. That's certainly my hope. It's one of the reasons why I want to explore in this direction. Right. So does anybody have any other questions or comments on this theme? So as an assignment, if everybody wants to go run off and think about this, you could go and look up simulation theory or simulation hypothesis. You could also go look up, so there's the book that inspired The Matrix. It's called Simulacra and Simulation. And I've read that book, and it's not a lot of fun to read. But there are a couple of concepts in there about how symbols create the representation of reality as we understand it. And that we all kind of rebuild our representations of reality constantly, and that sort of nothing is real without that kind of rebuilding of the map that we live in. And again, it kind of goes to the idea that, like, if we are the map builders, then perhaps we have some control over the nature of reality. Anyway, that's something for everyone to go have a look at. It'll probably make your brain hurt a little bit. And then the other thing to think about is the nature of bargaining and how that would play into what it is that Alice and Hatter are doing here. I wrote quite a bit about that on the Patreon post, the one that's called We're All Mad Here. So in bargaining, one of the things to think about is that bargaining is the resistance to change. Bargaining is the resistance to the next stage of our evolution, which is introduced or forced upon us by the confrontation with chaos. So that is the dissolving of reality. And again, this goes back to this idea that, like, the reality they live inside of is a simulation. Now, it could be that what Hatter has figured out is that if young Alice moves forward to become one with adult Alice, if they're finally made whole again, they're reunited, the reality in which that Hatter lives will cease to exist. So it could be that he discovers that what this Chaos Alice, the Shadow Alice, is doing is going to eventually lead to them being dissolved and destroyed. because that's the only real outcome that can come out of this. So he may be in the process of bargaining, try to save this loop that young Alice is left in. And that's why I think it makes a lot of sense to have him sort of digging into the nature of reality, and then the realization that the person whose mind they live within, that person's current status is very important to their continued existence. So it could be that he's kind of against what's going to happen, the inevitable transformation. He could be against that because it means an end to them.
I was going to say... I was going to say another thing since you brought up the simulacrum is Ghost in the Shell. Also, the Matrix pulled a lot from that on what is a person, where does that come from as well. So...
Yep. Wendy Job pastes a confused math, what the fuck, Pete GIF into the thing. I don't think it's as confusing as it may sound. And certainly by the time we polish it and we adapt it for our purposes here, all of this that we're talking about will become extremely simple and easy. It'll become obvious that, okay, yeah, Hatter lives inside of Alice's mind, but he lives inside the mind of young Alice. And when young Alice transforms and gets better, it means that the existence that he's used to and comfortable with will cease to exist and cease to be. And so he, like anyone, is resistant to change, especially if it means that his nature has to change as well. That's all. And how he explores that and what we do in relation to it, that becomes the gameplay, becomes the story. Wendy says, I sure freaking hope so, because I'm too stupid for this. Well, I don't want it to be complicated when we're done with it, for sure. But you got to keep in mind, one of the things that makes listening to, playing, reading, or watching a story unfold is the seeming complexity of it, which by the end of it is resolved into, hey, look, that quadriplegic is on top of the mountain. We never thought he would get there, right? Well, that's all I've got.
Yeah.
That's a starting place.
I think that's good. I was going to post some links to Wikipedia pages because people seem to be getting dumped on and off during the chat, it looks like. So
that's not good.
Yeah. So I guess anyone else...
Can't blame it on the Great Firewall today.
No, just blame it on the Discord. Anyone else have anything to say before I guess we wrap things up, guys, in the chat? Thank you, everyone, for coming out, as always.
So, let me just paste in here. So, this post on Patreon will open to the public by the time this goes live on YouTube. But also for all of the insane children who are here listening, including Wendy, I don't know, go have a read of that description of bargaining, and let me know if... I feel like I wrote that trying to make all this kind of clear. I'm not trying to confuse people. But anyway, have a read of that, and then let's come back and we'll talk about this some more. What I'd like is that we work on this subconsciously. By the way, these kinds of questions and this kind of story stuff, I've never been able to think about these things or solve them by directly working on them. It always has to be done in the back of your mind, kind of looking at it out the side of your eye. So do that, read a little bit about it, think a little bit about it, but don't try to do it directly, and stuff will come to you. Okay. Anybody else? Okay, well, I think that kind of wraps us up for today. So this has been Crowd Design Session number 21 with an extremely unstable Discord, apparently. So apologies for that, but I'm glad to have all of you here that did make it. And for those of you who are following along over on YouTube, this has not been live. If you're watching this on YouTube, it is a pre-recording of something that was live. So It means you don't need to be live chatting in the comments, because we'll just laugh at you later if you do that. But if you do want to join us live, there are links in the description below, which will take you over to our Patreon. And if you sign up for, I think it's $5 per month, you will get Discord access, along with all kinds of other fun access, and you get to become an insane child. So do consider doing that. And that's it for me, American McGee here in Shanghai, saying farewell. Everybody else?
Yep. Thanks for popping along, everyone. Listening to the chat. It's always good to have you here. Don't forget, we're doing a live stream on Thursday, if you're listening to this before Thursday. But, yeah, thanks all for coming.
Take care, everyone.
All right, everybody. Get bent. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.